right, we're getting everybody in. All right, let's see where Rob is today. Rob, you look like you've got a fence behind you. Is that a fence or is it wallpaper?
The Spring Hill Suites in you know somewhere.
Okay, all right. And James, where are you?
I'm here in California, and yeah, I'm not all over the world like Rob is all the time. So, although I did get the chance to chat with him out in Florida for the Florida NBA conference, which was nice.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have some fun trivia for us today. This is going to be like super easy because it's Friday afternoon and I think people are tired of hard questions. So the first trivia question that I have for everybody, what was the actual date? Not like the year, all this, but the actual date that FHFA was established.
I thought you said this was going to be an easy.
Oh, it's gonna be easy. Even if you get close to it, I'll give you a hint whether you're warm.
Okay, I'll go first. I'll say April 20th, 1938.
April 20th, 1938. Okay, James, what do
But,
you think?
but I think maybe I'll go an extra 20 years. I'll keep the same date.
Okay. Okay, 1938. So we have two votes for 1938.
Wait a
Yeah.
minute, I thought James said
No,
20 years later.
20 years
Oh,
later, so
20 years later, so
1958.
1958.
Yeah,
James,
this will be like
I got,
the
I got
Price is Right, close, right?
James. Nothing happened in the 1950s regarding mortgage. Don't, don't even go
Well, there were a lot of things that happened in mortgage in the 1930s. But yeah, the 50s. Okay. So we have a bunch in the chat.
there. I'll say
2008. Yes.
what about like wait, could you ask the question again?
FHFA.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard FHA. Sorry.
No, FHFA.
I'll say James is closer, but I'll say I'm going to come back now that I hear the extra syllable or the extra letter, and I'll say July 2008.
Okay.
I can't
James.
really go 20 years later after that. So I'll go like the Price. What date did you say, Rob?
July 2008.
Okay. All right. We'll do August 2008.
Okay, August 2008. All right. Yes, apparently my Southern is hard to hear. So FHFA. And yeah, Steve normally, you like provide this whole big transcript of all of the not only the actual answer, but like the reasoning behind them every week. So I'm surprised. Okay. So it is actually July 30th of 2008. So we had a lot of right answers.
Wow.
Yeah.
You nailed it, Rob.
Yeah. How
Even
about,
a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while. Jim.
wait, were you cheating from the chat? And were you like, you were trusting Mark or no, right? Like
No,
you,
I'm Melissa. I'm old, and unless you see me wearing my glasses, I can't see a lot of the chat.
okay. All right. All right. You're not old.
Yeah. My
Okay.
eye,
Second,
reading
second
glasses help.
question. CFPB. What was the date that the CFPB was established? And I don't think Southern gets in the way of that, so I'm not going to repeat it this time.
Wow.
CFPB.
Yeah,
I'll say July 2013.
2013.
James would know better than I would on this one.
The creation date, that's one of the things that just doesn't stick. But, I think his guess is as good as any I would give.
All right. Mark actually hit it on the head. So July 21st of 2011. So yeah. And how about first director of CFPB? That's an easy one, right?
Yeah, Richard Cordray.
All right. All right. All right. Okay.
Now, now being a drone for some law firm or lobbying firm in Ohio, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I say that? Sorry.
All right. Well, I'm glad to see that we have so many people with us today and they didn't get struck with the whole crowd strike challenge and it affects Zoom. So I'm going to knock on wood for us that we can make it all the way through the next 30 minutes.
So here's the deal, Melissa. Let me give you
Okay.
a little pro tip here.
Okay.
Given that we've got James on here and a lot of people who are well versed in compliance and so forth, every lender knows that changes in compliance and changes in regulators and regulations cost them money. For
Yes.
example, every once in a while, I'll receive an email and someone will say, "Hey, when are they going to do away with TRID?" And I'll say, "You know how many tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars were spent by lenders, you know, going toward adopting TRID? And so now that it's part of our industry, to reverse it would be just, I mean, would be the cost would be onerous." But when you talk about the CFPB, for example, or the FHFA, and Jay, I'd like to hear James' input. I mean, we're once again going off the script immediately, but changes in compliance, changes in regulators, changes in um, government bureaucrats have a cost to lenders. So, for example, coming up in November, I've heard we have an election, right? Got 3.5 more months of job owning. But the thinking is that if Donald Trump wins the election, then the CFPB will go through a whole nother reversal. And the current CFPB administration will go away and it'll be, new sheriff in town, kind of like when Kathy Graniger took over. So I want to get James' input. I mean, James, I mean, you experience these things firsthand with
Sure.
whether it's Fannie, Freddie, FHFA, or the CFPB. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on the additional cost of compliance when there's a change in administration?
Well, I mean, look, you nailed it insofar as there's always going to be this additional cost to try and tweak and adjust and get with the program of the leadership who's going to be there. That being said, if the cost is to potentially reduce your the regulatory oversight, which may be the case if President Trump goes ahead and takes the helm. And we saw obviously what just happened with the Chevron decision and how the composition of the Supreme Court is changing. Agencies. Um, I think there's always going to be that cost, but I think that most of the industry might prefer, the cost to be incurred in, reducing having to deal with the oversight part of that or the amount of it that may be incurred if you're going to spend. But like you said, they put a lot of money into building up their compliance. And while President Trump may get elected in this next, for the next administration, it may take a 180, right afterward. So this kind of ping pong is just goes with the territory, and it's been part of our industry, always. So I think it's just one of those
Right.
things that not fun, not happy, but not going anywhere.
All right. I think
Yeah.
I want to pause just for a brief moment. Can I do intros so that everybody knows who James, just in case?
I'm going to cross my fingers because I have something, a follow-up to that.
Okay, just like hold it just for a second. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Melissa Langdale. In case we have not met before, we are, as always, joined by the lovely Rob Chrisman from Spring Hill Suites and somewhere. And this week's very special guest is James Brody, who is the senior partner at Garris Horn. And we have lots and lots of awesome things to discuss. Like we already started to talk about the Chevron decision. So I'll pass it over to Rob so he can build on this because I know we've got a lot more coming.
Well, it just seems, and James, you know me. I mean, we go back a little bit. I mean, I get frustrated by the 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 problems that vendors and lenders encounter. I mean, vendors and lenders are just trying to, you know, lenders are just trying to help their borrowers. Vendors, whether you are a hedging company or a credit reporting agency, you're just trying to help your clients in a cost-effective way, and trying to help your clients help their borrowers. And so I view these changes in compliance or regulations or uh, whatever it might be in personnel as counterproductive. And right, going back to Kathy Kraniger, she was generally viewed by the industry as very industry favorable, and it was nice to see. It wasn't the shoot first, ask questions later kind of Richard
Yeah.
Cordray
Yeah.
administration. It was she honestly sought input from the industry. I've spent some time with her. She's very, I mean, she's a good, normal person, nice and helpful.
Yeah.
And I think the industry does like that. But when the industry, whether you're a lender or vendor, adapt to one administration's set of regulators
Yeah.
to change that, I don't know how much. I mean, they have to, it's a financial cost that gets passed on to borrowers, plain and simple. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let Melissa take it from here.
Yeah.
So I get off
We
my
have a
soapbox.
We have a lot of things that are contributing towards the cost of compliance right now, though. And there is, for those of you that don't know, there's an RFI right now out for the CFPB on fees. If y'all have not put your 2 cents together for it, I would highly recommend it. You know, I get on fees because obviously there's lots of discussion right now around, junk fees and what they're defining as junk fees, which I use those quotes on purpose because they're really not, they're clearly disclosed fees. And so, but the challenge that lenders have is you have layers between federal government and state government. So even if you have, kind of CFPB oversight, you're still in a lot of cases having to comply with not only the changes that are happening at CFPB, but also all the changes that are happening at the state level too. So, regardless, there's always that change to try to navigate. And right now, as they're digging into fees, the conversations that we've had with them thus far have been centered on, well, there's just too many fees and consumers don't understand all of the fees that are out there. Well, we're required in the state of Washington to call this fee this, and we're required in the state of Texas to call it this, right? And so you end up with the federal government saying, well, there's just too many things. Well, of course there are, because every state has their own individual input into what's compliant within their state. So I don't know. James, what do you think? What are some of the biggest drivers that you feel like are, and we're way off script by now, but
Yeah,
No,
we need
listen,
to get back to purchases at some point.
yeah.
no, listen, I mean, you're absolutely right. We have, like, right now, I'm dealing with audits in Washington, and Texas and Michigan. And the bottom line is that the differences and the requirements, as you're talking about, the costs of compliance, the fees that are going to the borrowers, just the management of all of that is extremely burdensome. And when you're in this challenging, or has been a challenging market ever since the exit of COVID, to varying degrees, putting that money, investing that money into compliance, both to explain to your consumers, as well as to deal with, all the various regulations to protect those consumers, is extremely overwhelming, to a lot of, I mean, we represent lenders, of all sizes, and some of the smaller ones who, they serve an important role. They are being crushed by all of this. So that's what we're seeing. And, you know,
Do you feel like, and I know your world, you are heavily involved in some repurchase
yeah.
and buyback requests. What are you seeing in that space that may be helpful for everybody here to know
What,
about?
yeah, I mean, listen, the bottom line is that, there's an ebb and flow on these repurchases. As rates go up, repurchases tend to go up. As they go down, they tend to go down. Not all that long ago, I spoke alongside Fannie and Freddie. Weren't very happy that they had me on the panel, but nevertheless, we had a good discussion. And it looks like some efforts are being made by the agencies, FHFA, to try and rein these things in and work in a more cooperative fashion with those in the industry. Because when you are seeing what we've seen, where you have performing loans that maybe have a value issue, and that these USPAP for these appraisers is not a science, it's more of an art. So to have to buy back a performing loan and then sell it on a scratch and dent because you're not in the business of servicing,
Yeah.
is extremely problematic. But that at this moment, I wouldn't say that they are over bearing. And now we just wrapped up the last of our cases. We had been representing a number of lenders against the FDIC on things like old WAMU loans. So, some of these issues come up, a decade later. Some of them are very recent. But I think that the industry is moving in the right direction with a lot of various developments to try and address these issues. Um, so I'm excited about that. Yeah.
I normally talk about technology in such I'm super excited about it. And there's all sorts of great things that can happen to our industry when technology is involved. But there is, in some cases, a little bit of a downside, because the more our agency friends lean on technology, the more this art that happens in the appraisal world can really get tricky, right? Because you've got this AVM and data set that says, you know what, 3-bedroom homes in the city of, I don't know, Springfield, have a value of this. And well, of course it's a 3-bedroom home, but all those 3-bedroom homes were backed up to a highway. And this one is, on the golf course and has a pool in the backyard, right? So there is this, what I'm hearing from a lot of our lenders is there is this kind of the back and forth that goes on, particularly around appraisals right now. It's really driven in a lot of cases by the data that they're getting through some, AVM or, something of that nature. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, and I mean, there's been a lot more talk about, especially in the case of valuations, about appraisal bias has been the buzzword. And we've dealt with those issues, but it's very difficult, to address appraisal issues insofar as, it's not like hey, I made X dollars in income, and you can check yes or no. When it comes to the valuations, it's really who has the better review appraiser, who can. So it's a more difficult issue in some ways. Now, attorneys usually love, whether it's ambiguities or vagueness. It allows us some wiggle room. But if you have to do that with an agency, the problem obviously is that you have to put the business at the front of your concern over, what they're saying about whether it's valid or not, because you can't just go back to them and say you're wrong and then have to worry about your ability to do any business. So, those are some challenging issues, but certainly, whether it's the repurchase activity or certainly the regulators right now are, there's an uptick in that activity. Enforcement, there's been discussion about putting yellow comp on the front burner again. which has been something that, everyone in the industry, no matter, how many times we'll talk about that issue, it's always a hot one because competition in this challenging environment is, very thick. I mean,
Yeah.
getting those LOs, getting production, and trying to do it in a way that attracts them more than the competitor or two down the street. Uh, that's what we're seeing a lot of at the moment.
Well,
But
and then
James, so don't you run into issues with people who don't want a lot of government interference, but yet are certainly happy to have the government fix LO comp or quote fix something that impacts them?
Well, I mean, the push and pull between, whether it is not wanting a lot of government involvement, and also wanting that fix, it's always going to be there. But I tend to think the problem is that the fixes have been, and again, sometimes we love ambiguities and vagueness, but when you are teaching by
Spoken like a
enforcement,
true lawyer, James.
thank you. But when you are teaching by enforcement actions, and you don't have that clarity, it's a real stumbling block in our industry because lenders, everyone in the industry wants to comply. They want to do that. They don't want to, you
For the
know,
most part.
oh, for the most part. They don't always want to think, am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? Am I going to get hit at some point?
Give me the
Yes,
rule, give me the rules, and I'll play.
that's right. That's right.
And the
At
same
least you
rules apply to everybody else.
that's right. And at least you know those rules. And when you know those rules, then you can, whether it's full compliance, whether it's a gray, I mean, some people love to live in that gray area because if they don't, they're not going to keep their lights on, their business is going to be shut down. And they have to think to themselves, what is the risk and what is the reward in this circumstance? And I'm not talking about, outright non-compliance and trying to do something that is untoward towards consumers. But, when, like, for instance, you've got LO comp and you have issues that come up with, well, Joe Schmo down the street is doing
As a
this.
point bank.
Right. I know that's not, necessarily kosher, but, you know, all my LOs are running over there. So that's really the, conundrum. And I think, because we talked a little bit, or we at least referenced the Chevron decision, things could really change because of, that decision in a big way. And it really will impact our industry and many industries,
Can
insofar
you
as,
can you, sorry, James,
yeah,
can you, it's the Chevron deference, right?
yeah,
It's
right.
not the Chevron defense.
Yes.
It's so A, why is it called that? And B, what is your, I know you're an attorney,
Yeah.
but what is your one paragraph of why that Supreme Court decision impacts lenders and vendors?
So the Chevron decision, the Chevron deference, back in the 1980s, this was erected, and effectively it said that, when courts are looking at, new regulations or, administrative actions, or their interpretations of the statutes for those, um, they first look at whether or not there was any ambiguity, or the statute was clear. If there was any ambiguity, then the courts, the judiciary, would give deference to the agency's interpretation of those statutes. Um, However, now the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was a 6-3 decision down ideological lines, but the conservative members of the court basically said, look, um, it's not up to the administrative, the executive to interpret legislation. It's up to the judiciary. by going ahead and abdicating our role in clarifying and analyzing these statutes, we're giving off a power that they should not have. It's not up to them. So court basically said, look, we're taking back our our role of deciding, interpreting this legislation. However, if there is a factual history, if it looks like the agency, whatever agency it is, because it's all agencies, if there is a track record for their interpretation that is really powerful or clear, the court's going to give them some deference. It's just not going to be really automatic. Now, for the lenders in the mortgage banking industry, that has really come with like the CFPB and how much authority and power they have used. For instance, we have a case right now where one of my partners, who used to be the head lawyer for the CFPB, has been representing a company called Townstone in a redlining case. And the lead counsel on that is actually a group that I had been I clerked with in law school called Pacific Legal Foundation. And so they, that was the argument being made by the CFPB, based on the Chevron decision and, the ability for them to make the interpretation of what was required and not required. And interestingly enough, even though we had prevailed at the district court and we were up at the Seventh Circuit, the Seventh Circuit just basically said, slap that down using somewhat of the rationale of Chevron. So it will be interesting to see whether or not, now that the Chevron decision has been overturned, whether they'll try to settle it or whether it'll go up to the United States Supreme Court, which at this very moment we understand is, has put Chevron in the dustbin. So that could very well affect that case and many others that come, and how the agencies, how the CFPB deal with their ability to make regulations and what enforcement actions they bring, as well as what people do to defend against it. I think there's going to be a lot more challenges now based on that decision to the CFPB's actions. And I think it's probably a good thing that happens, because, from my perspective, my opinion is that the CFPB has taken some runaway power here and there. And it really is up to the court to do their role and of the judiciary and rein that in.
James, congratulations.
Oh.
That is the longest paragraph. I mean, I'm hearkening back to reading Robinson Crusoe, I think, and Daniel Defoe would have these long paragraphs that I would get. That was like overwhelming.
And
So
I don't get paid by the word, so
basically what you're saying, I mean, and I'm not an attorney, but are you saying that what this Chevron deference situation is doing is turning decisions or moving decision-making power from the agencies back into the courts?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was it was looked at not necessarily as an abdication of their role, but and they went through a long, analysis going all the way back to, the Marbury and, the separation of powers. But the bottom line here is that when you have an agency who is interpreting what powers they have, and you're at least getting the deference from the courts, it's taking away an important piece where you have some redress to deal with the problems and a lot of the concerns that have come up specifically with the CFPB. But again, this decision applies across the board.
Oh.
All right. I have a, Melissa, if you don't mind me asking one more question during our
Okay,
session.
fine.
And I know we don't have, oh my God, we're out of time. Never
We
mind.
are out of time, but you can have the last question. You.
So getting back to the nuts and bolts, James, one paragraph. Somebody, if somebody's on the call here
Yeah,
and they work for a lender and they receive a repurchase request from Fannie
yes.
Mae or Freddie Mac,
Uh-huh.
what are the first three things that you would tell that lender to do?
30
Uh,
seconds.
yep. Check the deadline. Get it to a designated person in your company who's responsible for overseeing and shepherding that process, and make sure you have a process. If you follow that, so many people get in trouble by not meeting the deadlines, of, whether it is under your MLPA with an investor, whether it is the agency guidelines. And we have put together also, kind of a cheat sheet, and maybe I find a way to circulate this, but a cheat sheet that lays out the deadlines for the agencies, in a very easy to read format. But, in a nutshell, make sure you have the best ability to defend against these by adhering to the deadlines and not sitting on them or letting it sit in a pile, until people get around to it, because by that time, your ability to do what needs to be done is drastically diminished.
James, you missed one.
Oh, well, of course,
Yeah, you gotta
yeah,
also, for those of you that don't know, TMC has just launched a tracker for repurchase
Yeah.
requests. And we're trying to gather as much data as we possibly can, to understand trends and what lenders are seeing, and have the ability of really going back to FHFA, and our friends at Fannie and Freddie as well, with some substantive data across our network and across the industry. So the fourth thing that James did not mention is also to submit your data over to our repurchase tracker, so that we could get a better understanding, and have something substantive to take back to Fannie, Freddie, and FHFA, as we might see things that might need to be addressed for the
and,
network.
and I think that's critical because, as I said, even speaking alongside Fannie and Freddie, they really do seem to be intent on trying to work with us, and make things better. So getting them that data to sink their teeth into is critical.
Yep, for sure. Every conversation, and they've been fantastic partners for us as anything has come up. We have a group within TMC too that as things come up, we'll bring it to Fannie or Freddie, and they have been fantastic friends and trying to help us resolve the things that can get resolved. So appreciate their efforts there too. All right.
Absolutely.
We are over time, and I want to be really conscious of that. James, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Everybody that's here, thank you guys for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. We know you have a lot of choices on where you could be, and you're spending it with us. So thanks so much. Hope this was valuable to you guys, and we'll see you right back here again next week.
Hey, thank you very much.